Brandon Martinez is a pretty infamous wingnut debater in the political debate sphere when it comes to those on the dissident right, and I wanted to make this video in order to show how easy it is to absolutely destroy the idea of a white ethno-state, and the idea that such a project would actually be viable in the slightest. I didn't choose Martinez specifically because I don't think he's particularly smart, quite the opposite. I don't think he makes notably good arguments, nor do I think he's even a frontman in terms of the dissident right and their online presence, but I chose him because tons of people crawl out of the WordPress woodwork and mobilize anywhere he goes on YouTube. Wingnuts are particularly adept at this because they want to give off the impression that there's a lot of them, despite the fact that everything they appear to espouse is the opposite of reality. The fact that there's so many people cheering for him could possibly give off the impression that he's the interlocutor with the superior ideas, when that's just not the case. He might be a bit harder to debunk than Sean because I actually took time to think of arguments against his points, whereas with Sean, I just look at the abstracts of his studies and see the results contradict what he's saying. But once I elucidate the context of Martinez's talking points, you'll see why it's easy to debunk, and why one would either be a LARPer or a complete fool to fall for the talking points. The premises of his worldview go something like this. Diverse societies tend to be less socially cohesive. This is absolutely true, and it's overwhelmingly reified by empirical evidence. You can get meta-analysis after meta-analysis demonstrating this. But there's one paramount reason for this lack of cohesion that Martinez and other white nationalists conveniently omit: racism. Another fact that's empirically demonstrated to be true beyond a reasonable doubt is because of the cultural, political, social, and racial prejudices people exhibit. They make less socially cohesive societies. Like how they can bring up their studies on the lack of racial cooperation in diverse societies, you can say the primary reason for this is racism, and the fact that it's most patent in diverse societies will not only prove your point further, but will make your white nationalist opponent look like the aggressor in this socio-political scenario. In addition to this, there's a coordinated effort by globalists to replace white people and their culture, whatever that is, with minorities and minority culture demographically. I couldn't think of a greater epitome of tinfoil hat wearing brain rot. One common talking point to substantiate this conception of the future of whites is the point that in recent years there have been farming attacks in South Africa on white farmers done by blacks. Parts of this talking point are extremely deceitful, and other parts of it are an outright lie. While the attacks do target farmers who are usually white, they also target farm workers who are usually black, with black farmers also being victims of violent attacks. Another crucial point that they omit is the fact that there's no evidence to suggest that white farmers are at a disproportionate risk of getting killed, and nobody's replacing whites. They're just living in the same country as you. Maybe you might be a minority, but you won't be marginalized if you fight for anti-racist policies. Unless whites are choosing to breed with non-whites higher on average, get more fuckable, because the people on 4chan aren't who I'd want to spend the rest of my life with. The fact that the developed countries have lower birth rates is a testament to our technological development as people in the first world. This is because in developing countries, children are needed not only as a labor force, but since there are less developed social safety nets, parents have to care for their children at an old age. To quote a paper from a man by the name of Nargund in a journal called Facts, Views, and Vision Issues in OBGYN, he explains, quote, "The social structure, religious beliefs, economic prosperity, and urbanization within each country are likely to affect birth rates as well as abortion rates. Developed countries tend to have a lower fertility rate due to the lifestyle choices associated with economic affluence, where mortality rates are low, birth control is easily accessible, and children often can become an economic drain caused by housing, education costs, and other costs involved in bringing up children. Higher education and professional careers often mean that women have children late in life." Unquote. And what's causing so many migrants from south of the border to flock to the north of it, and for Middle Easterners and Africans to flock to Europe? In the case of the former, our war on drugs emboldens the cartels that have ravaged Latin America for decades to produce substances that are easy to make, like fentanyl. By keeping these substances illegal and other completely natural human activities like sex work and gambling prohibited, we only facilitate them to engage in more illegal activity, and as a result, they have many more sources of revenue than they would otherwise. This is the MO of right-wing politics, i.e. giving a temporary solution to a problem that will be perennial if we don't treat the root cause of it. Right-wing solutions are red herrings, or a band-aid to a massive flesh wound, whereas our treatment are sutures and plenty of rehab, if you will. In the case of the latter, do I really have to explain why West Asia and Africa produced the most immigrants to Europe? Because of our constant interference overseas, simply for the purpose of extracting the natural resources possessed by other countries, we constantly destabilize their infrastructure structure, embolden terrorists, rinse and repeat. We need to stop mingling in the affairs of others, and Martinez claims to believe this, but he's inconsistent with that, as we'll see later. There's no globalist conspiracy to replace whites. And what the hell even is white culture? As a matter of fact, Martinez is so keen on obliterating the high IQs of the Nazis who tend to boast about it by saying Europe is a culturally homogenous continent. This is the stupidest statement ever made in the Omniverse. Do you think bullshit projects like Yugoslavia were anywhere near culturally cohesive? How about Russians and Ukrainians? How about the Swedish and the Danes? Oh, and what was that last attempt at a white ethno-state with a single culture? Yeah, turns out forcefully making people associate makes for very incohesive societies. Nazis will try to make you look inconsistent on this point by saying, well, that's what you want. You want multiculturalism and associations among insanely diverse people. This isn't the case because leftists are broadly for voluntary associations, are who they want to be with. That'll make for the most cohesive societies. Additionally, in the debate, he brought up how Putin prides himself on the fact that Russia is multicultural, but do you think going in and raising a country to annex it is voluntary? And why are Chechens and Tuvans and Mongols getting recruited at disproportionately higher rates? As Vosh brought up, Stalin prided himself on this, but also gulagged Soviet minorities. Because of this attempt to replace white people and this lack of social cohesion, which Nazis actually caused, people of European descent need their own ethno-state. And these are the so-called high IQ people. Besides the fact that a guy with the name Martinez tries to frivolously explain how Spanish people are white, despite the fact that centuries of Arab colonization substantially muddied the gene pool, the fact that he's legitimately proposing for Europe to be united into one state is enough to discredit all his ideas. If you think projects like Yugoslavia were anything to go by, you'd have to rule the entirety of Europe with an iron fist to keep it politically stable. I can bring up the seemingly infinite list of wars that have exclusively been fought among Europeans, and somehow these mentally deluded people are still convinced that the optimum political scenario is a European ethno-state. Also, I find it ironic that in his debate with Vosh, Martinez said he wanted a white ethno-state in Africa, despite the fact that he previously mentioned he wanted Africa for Africans. In an attempt to excuse this contradiction when Vosh highlighted it, Martinez said that those whites have been there for years, therefore they deserve their own state. Oh, so he's for indigenous people having their own states, except he's not. Right-wing politics are fundamentally built on cognitive dissonance, and so long as we're saying that people who have been in a certain place for a long time deserve their own state, the Muslims coming into Europe have been there for decades. Would Martinez give them their own state? What do you think? Because states like East and West Germany, the two Irelands, France and England, Denmark and Sweden, Russia and Ukraine have had almost primal historical tensions among them. Good luck making them get along. China isn't an example of a state doing well because of homogeneity, because the CPC recognizes 56 different ethnic groups. Japan's birth rate is plummeting, its suicide rate is skyrocketing, its economy is stagnating. They're not doing too great. Also, I should mention Rhodesia because there's a lot of Nazi nostalgia for it, specifically because it held up racial hierarchy like no other state. Africa for Africans, despite the fact that it conquered and subjugated the blacks until the colonial government got overthrown. No white genocide was enacted. Well, that's Martinez's ideology sufficiently destroyed, although I would like to do it in real time, so I guess that's my dream debate for now. Tune in next time, because with this channel we're going to be covering topics that are currently relevant to the debatosphere /social/political niche on YouTube. Thanks for watching.